Regular.
Regular.
I heard something else. Okay.
Congress over the summer when they were really sort of ramping up the discussion. Yo. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of AutoBlack. This is AutoBlack for y'all who don't know. AutoBlack is a podcast, discussion-based podcast hosted by 5 Black architects in which we discuss everything from politics to culture to architecture, urbanism. And we do it all through a unapologetically Black architectural point of view. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Robert. And of course, I always have my friends with me. I got X.
What's up?
We got Whitney.
Hi.
We got Jamar.
What it do, baby?
And we have Perla.
Hello.
So thank you all for joining in to us. And if this is your first time listening, welcome to your new favorite podcast. What's up, family? How y'all feeling? What's going
We
on?
ain't family.
What's up? I actually want to make a correction. You said 5 Black architects. It's only 3. Congrats, Jamar.
It's only 2. It's only 2. Whoa. It's only 2.
You passed all your exams, though.
But I ain't got license yet. Maryland, don't come for me. Don't come for me, Maryland.
So,
I'm in the process.
recent development, Jamar Demetrius Moore has just passed his final exam to becoming a licensed architect. Very grueling process, but man, big ups, big homie. Congrats.
Y'all know I am the favorite here. Before you put my whole name out there, so now I'm gonna have stalkers because I am the fan favorite of this group.
Who told you that, though?
The people. Have you not seen our Instagram? It's blowing up.
They.
Instagram is on fire right now. 1,000 followers, all because of me.
You know what? No, I'm not going to rain on your parade. Yes, everyone is. They feel great about you, Jamar.
But in all realness, though, like it's a good feeling to be finally done. It's taken way too long, but I'm thankful. I appreciate every single one of y'all for keeping me above water because your boy was drowning for a long time, but it feels good.
When did you start?
I started after the pandemic. We'll go with that one. No, I started in 2019, but the pandemic, the whole, the Prometric centers closing, so that took a year. And then I waited until they had the online version to retake the exam. So really, I really started in 2021.
Man, I think it took me about maybe 3 years. I think it took me about 3 years. I got affected by the pandemic too. But man, it's a grueling process. So it's no short of a big accomplishment though, for real.
Y'all really use the pandemic as an excuse.
Hell yeah!
Whoa, Whitney!
I'm just saying.
I only rescheduled one exam because of the pandemic, and that was when everything first started. I was like, I don't really know what this is, so let me just not go nowhere. But I actually still went to Prometric to test just because I did better that way.
Oh,
it was up to me. Yeah.
You want to know the one thing that pissed me off with the exams? As much money as we're paying to get through these exams, and each exam is a couple $100, the least that they could do is have 300 DPI images for some of these questions. Man, there were so many questions which I struggled to answer because it was pixelated, and it's like one of those things where it's select all the bikes in the picture, and you got a little bit of a handlebar inside of it. It's it's irritating, but I digress.
But yeah, upcoming next is Perla. Then we got X. Come on, let's go, Perla X. You got this.
We'll see.
There was an exam that we took at UVA, and I saw X's score before he saw our score.
Which class was this?
I think
it was
a
paper. Wasn't that a paper?
It was a paper. It was either a paper. I think it was a paper. And I gave it to X, and I saw his score. His score wasn't a good score. And I saw he was like, I was like, hey man, what'd you get? He was like, just know next time I'm gonna pass next time. And no, I forgot what he said. He said, just know I got it next time or something like that.
Yeah.
But hey, y'all got this though, seriously.
Yeah.
That's funny. I remember that. I also remember I was actually telling Alicia about this after you passed your exam. I remember that one time that one final we had first year where we were walking out of the final as we were finishing, and you were walking you were walking in because you completely misread the time that the final started, and yeah.
Yo, the funny thing is, I walked past X. X was coming out the exam. I was like, yo, X, yo, where you going? We got an exam in like an hour. He was like, oh, I already finished. I'm like, all right, stop playing X. Stop playing as a year, man. I already finished. I was like, all right, well, I'm going in. And then I realized, I was like, yo, I'm late. All because I forgot I was playing one game on Facebook. And I think I tried to beat X's score, actually. I was beating X's score. And then I went to the exam. Like, the bus was empty. I was like, why is it so empty on the bus? But, yeah. That sums me up with exams right there. It takes me forever.
Well, you did it, so congrats.
Thanks.
But hey, we got a dope topic that we're going to be talking about today. We're actually going to be talking about the architecture, urban design inspiration of Black Panther. And it's a pretty good topic, especially because we're coming off the heels of our discussion on like hip hop architecture and really trying to use hip hop and even the legitimacy of the discipline as a way to filter and to create Black aesthetic in architecture. So now we have actually a quote unquote real life example where this fictional city of Wakanda was created and used to basically create sort of the worldview in which we were fantasizing over in terms of hip hop architecture. So I think it's going to be a pretty dope discussion, especially because when Black Panther was first released back in 2018, I mean, just it being a cultural phenomenon was just extremely, I mean, I hadn't seen anything like it before in my lifetime. And then I know within the circles of Black architects everywhere, like this really became a moment in which we can have a free discussion over the successes and the failures of this fictional city and this fictional world that is a truly autonomous Black society. And so like we're going to sort of revisit that. We're going to jump back and revisit that. So to sort of just open it up, and for all of our listeners, we are going to be responding to a few particular sources, a few architectural digest uh, um, articles in which there's some still images and there's some video and there's some specific images of Wakanda that we'll be responding to. So we'll place those articles in the show notes. So feel free to use that as resources as we kind of dive into the discussion. But for you all, as a first question, just as you picture us back into that entry scene where we first get a first glimpse of Wakanda, where the ship with T'Challa, they're going in and they kind of go through that little force field, and you have that first picture of like Wakanda. Like, just give me your thoughts and your response on just that one still image where you actually see not only specific buildings, but you kind of see the urban makeup and the urban fabric of this autonomous, wealthy, affluent Black society.
It didn't look that wealthy to me. I don't know.
Yeah. I was gonna say I was trying to think about how I felt watching that scene. I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's not really landing for me.
Yeah, I think the initial visual wasn't. I mean, it was it was good because it looked futuristic, sort of, but I think there's a little bit of context that I didn't get in that very first scene.
Mm.
What context specifically?
Sort of like them trying to use more traditional African architecture more futuristically in their designs of the new city. It's kind of like so growing up in Trinidad for a few years, and then you say, "Oh, you're gonna move to New York City," and you think the whole of New York City is Manhattan, But when you get there, Manhattan is like the small part, and Brooklyn is like low rise. Well, back then it was mostly low rise, buildings. So it's kind of like it's it's there, but it's not fully what you expected, kind of thing.
Hmm. So it's like sort of like a letdown because I mean, like, what did you expect?
See, I don't know what I expected. I don't know.
Is it more so
So
based on the experience of New York? Sorry, Rob. But I just wanted to ask: is it more so based on the experience of like, or what you were seeing in terms of like the city of Brooklyn or New York? Or sorry, Manhattan.
Probably more so what I was seeing. So like, if you go into like Wakanda and you just look at it, it's it's a nice city, but I maybe it's my expectation of modernism and how it would have impacted Africa in a sense because in many ways all of our cities are looking the same. So like when
Mhm.
I did study abroad in China, like Shanghai is kind of like New York City, but like 10 times bigger. It's just New York City, just everywhere. And it's like you're in the middle of New York City everywhere you go. It's kind of like what I expected when I initially moved to New York. But it looks like New York. And I just feel like a lot of our cities are modern with the skyscrapers and the glass and the metal. It's just most of our cities kind of look the same. You turn a corner and you could be in Beijing. You turn a corner, you could be in
Mhm.
Boston. You turn a corner, you could be in LA. It's sort of like similar aesthetics throughout. So I don't know if that's why I was expecting something a little bit different from the aesthetic of Wakanda.
Mm.
X is
Yeah.
speaking like a true New Yorker. Everything looks like New York. There's no other greater place than New York City. No other place can touch it. So my first reaction, honestly, was like from the first view, you start to see that they're using more traditional materials, which is interesting to me because I feel like architecture is kind of getting away from the mechanical, systems to like bringing fresh air and trying to be a little bit more sustainable with how we, navigate and create cities. So for me, seeing like they're using more traditional, like it seemed like they had like some earthworks. It seemed like they were just kind of blending the Western materials with the more traditional local materials of that area. That was kind of my first, experience in like I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, what's interesting when you hear the director Ryan Coogler and then the set director, I'm blanking on her name. When you hear about them, sort of how they started with creating the visual imagery of Wakanda, like they literally had to create the history. So as an exercise, they started, a timeline basically. When was Wakanda first founded, and then what happened through these specific moments in history, what happened as industrialization happened. Like they've literally charted out the history of Wakanda because they had to give it a historical and cultural depth. um and so you have this fictional place that you now have to give context as to its growth. And one of the things about Wakanda also is that it is absent of colonialism and Western expansion. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have any sort of influence or take any cues from the architectural styles or the way that cities develop, but there's no direct um, there's no direct effect of colonialism within Wakanda. And so, like when I first look at that image, like that opening scene, you see some of the things that you would expect from a city that developed as its society advances. So you see it along a river, in between mountain ranges because of the availability of resources and just kind of the things that sort of make sense. But I think one of the things that is pretty interesting is that it almost seems as if there is no zoning in a way that we employ zoning. So, like a place like New York, or even where live in Baltimore, like it's so heavily influenced by zoning that the density is contained within a certain period, within a certain segment of the city, and then it's more so sort of low rise and sprawling. Whereas in Wakanda, obviously there's a containment of the density, but it's a little bit more organic, and then also it's void of any visible vehicular infrastructure, and you see a real homogeneous balance between landscape, urbanism, environment, um, which I thought was interesting.
Rob, I kind of want to push back a little bit here. Or actually, let me pose it as a question. Are you saying the lack of zoning in Wakanda aided in how you think it was successful in terms of urban design?
So I think that Wakanda, obviously, and we'll get into sort of like Afrofuturism a little bit later, but obviously Wakanda is developing in the spirit of Afrofuturism. And so part of it is that they've created this society that is in perfect balance with environment and urbanism. And so essentially, the challenges that we faced in terms of climate change, and the challenges that we face in terms of over crowded uh, overcrowdedness, and lack of affordable housing and transportation, like Wakanda solves all of that. And so you see the city as a reflection of of solving all those world challenges. So there so like the my saying that the lack of zoning that I see, more so in the sense that it's all perfectly blended between how the city has evolved and how the natural environment has also been integrated within it.
Mm.
I would argue that they're beyond zoning because if we're looking at Wakanda
Yeah.
as a city in an Afrofuturism space, they had vibranium, which is supposed to make them more technologically advanced. So I would say they have zoning, but it's beyond our understanding of zoning because they're so much further ahead technologically. So it's
Hmm.
kind of like how you're saying like it's a perfect utopian space. I think it's they were once trying out, what was out in the world, or they did it well in advance, and now they're like 100 years past it.
Mm. My pushback, and I might be doubling back a little bit because I know Wakanda is a fictional place, but in the video where the architectural researcher was kind of breaking down the relationship between like different parts of Africa and how it was all kind of incorporated in the design of Wakanda, he did point out the Johannesburg where they were building towers next to small huts and stuff. I'm just like, well, if there were zoning laws in place, and reason being, or for example, if a tower unfortunately collapsed, or if there was a fire or something like that, there's zoning laws in place that would kind of prevent the fire from transferring from that building to the next, or kind of protect its surroundings. And so my initial reaction was like, well, it doesn't make sense to then just pick something up that obviously has its flaws and put it into Wakanda. But since Wakanda is a fictional place, and if it is a utopia of sorts where they have clean air and vibranium doesn't break or something like that, I could understand how it could fit. But my initial reaction, or my initial pushback to the perfection of it not having zoning laws, was particularly because I know, or some of the zoning laws are in place because of a unfortunate event that happened prior, you
Hmm.
know. But that's not to say an unfortunate event won't happen in Wakanda. I mean, in the second Wakanda, the tower collapsed, right? And so I imagine, and you can kind of see the effect where the water kind of washed out all its surrounding areas. And so I think that might be something to consider, where we are kind of just incorporating one thing into another without really kind of dissecting it or kind of solving the issue in that former example.
I would like challenge us to think of like Ryan Coogler's stance on it though. Like if you're creating a utopian made up world, why not create a world where fire is not an issue? Where like you're so technologically advanced, materials don't burn. Like that's not going to be an issue for you. You literally are dreaming up a perfect place. And then I think, in like you were saying, the second one, it's not perfect anymore because things happen because he died. So it's like you can see where things start crumbling, which reflects the emotional part of the movie, I think.
Right.
So I'm gonna take this a little left, but like obviously Wakanda is a utopian, right? But if you think about it, right? So Wakanda has a king, right? And it's King T'Challa, and then there's like this challenge of his throne by Killmonger, which let's be real, he's probably one of the greatest villains Marvel's ever thought of. But it made me think, what if Wakanda is North Korea, right? Like, how many people from Wakanda are actually able to leave Wakanda besides maybe the king? Like, and we try to make it sound like it's classless, but maybe there are classes there. There has to be a ranking system or something like that. But obviously, there are some views that they're able to take clues from Western civilization because they're able to travel out, right? They can see what's happening in Western society. They can come in and say, hey, all right, we're not going to do this, or we're going to design like this, or whatever. But I'm just curious, it's like, how many people can actually leave, right? Is this just a big dictatorship where it's so insulated that people don't have the ability to really be educated on anything else besides what's within because they think they are so perfect, almost like the U.S.? So I don't know. It was just a different type of take on like this whole utopian society. Like, is it actually beneficial, and is it what leads to its downfall in the second, version?
Well, maybe they have it so good that their poorest are better than whatever rich people. I mean, if you can get free food and housing and like how like what else, at what point what else do you need? Of that and free.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting off of that is that I think we're trying to implant our Western ideas onto a community, a city, a culture that wasn't influenced on Western expansion the way that our culture was. So, and what's also interesting is that they in order to create this fictional African utopia, they had to actually pull from some African aesthetics to help create the legitimacy of this place. And so some of the things that they've pulled on for him is like some of these for example like Zulu compounds in which there is a main complex or main communal gathering that is shared, and then around that are these single room residences that are that share this communal court. So there's this expectation of individualism, but also you're a part of a larger community and there's shared resources. And when I looked at how Wakanda is actually void of infrastructure that supports like vehicular traffic and all of that, it kind of made me think of how what's not present in Wakanda is this idea of consumerism or materialism, and like there is no need for own individual personal vehicles, and that vehicle, and there's space and infrastructure that takes up. However, Wakanda is the opposite of that, is where there's a shared resource, there's public transportation, there's a shared aspect of community. And I'm not saying that that's going to necessarily be void of like hierarchy, because we obviously see that there's a monarchy in place. And even when the different tribes come together, there's hierarchies, but it's all within a balance of shared community.
Sounds like North Korea to me.
I'm starting to be more convinced by Jamar's like thinking because like we were talking about like there's no you don't really see any infrastructure for vehicular traffic, but it's like literally our first moment of seeing Wakanda is from a flying vehicle, but like you don't see as many in the air as you would think there would be. And then when T'Challa and Lupita's character, like doing their whole romance, and we know that they are considered higher up in the hierarchy, they're shown with the people, and with the people you see like the shared public transportation and people walking. So it's starting to make me think about their structure as a society. And I mean, you could argue that those people don't really know, but I mean, like X was saying, like they're well fed, they're happy, things are free, but it's like, why aren't they the ones in the flying vehicles? Like, why didn't we see more flying vehicles and infrastructure for that? Because now that you think about it, you don't really see any platforms on any of the towers, they just kind of go up. And it's like if there were more flying vehicles, there would be places for people to land.
I feel like I derailed the conversation. I'm so sorry. It was a joke, but it kind of ain't a joke, but it kind of is. But I don't know. Like I feel like because public transportation is so demonized in American society that it's hard for us to think of a world where we can actually walk freely and like not need to rely on personal vehicles. Like even like the little hoverboards and like the scooters and everything. Like everything is so commercialized here and capitalized on that I think honestly our minds can't, like you said, like I think they're above zoning. I think they're above what we can comprehend because we're so force fed that we need to have private ownership of every single thing we do, and we can't have shared community spaces because that's just not American.
Mm-hmm. Well, so going in off of that, like let's take a closer look at like the Citadel, which is like the main complex of where sort of the monarchy lives, like the center of the governance of Wakanda. And just give me your architectural interpretation of just the Citadel. And I'll kind of set it up a little bit. If you all remember, it's the two spiraling towers that's sort of separated by a moat, and then it has terraced landscape that sort of uh, revolves around it. And I think it's kind of pretty evident that it is also inspired by some of the great mosque uh, of 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 the King Mansa Musa era. So it's obviously it's obviously like a clear reference of like wealth and power. Um, but give me your sort of architectural interpretation of that.
It was just okay to me. It wasn't super exciting. It just kind of felt like a lot of metal. It felt like something we'd see like anywhere in a futuristic type space where they're getting ready to go to war for something.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie, I wasn't impressed. It was alright.
Interesting. Wait, is this it's kind of mid reaction just based off of
You don't have to add
okay,
kind of in front of it. You can just say it's mid.
Rob,
let me ask,
we are
is
too
it
old
based
to be
is
saying
it
mid.
is it based off of a true feeling of it not meeting a particular expectation, or is it as a black American not necessarily understanding the context in the way that somebody who is from West Africa, East Africa, and sort of understands this context a little bit more? Is that kind of like the reason why there's this sort of reaction?
Oh,
Oh, sorry. I think for me, it was just the sequence of events like in the movie because you're introduced to it, you're flying over it, you see all this stuff, and then they immediately go to the Citadel. So for me, I felt a little disappointed because I wanted to see more of the city, and you didn't get that. It's just straight to the monarchs. They have issues. Cool, but like it kind of just felt like a backdrop to me. It didn't do much
Mm.
for me because the city was just like, okay, this is a new city. We can explore something, see a little more, and it was just a very small snippet in the beginning.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's intentional. I wonder if they intentionally designed the building not too glamorous so that it plays within the idea of this is a inclusive community, and we really just want to be this perfect place where no matter if you are the king or a regular citizen of the country, although there is a hierarchy, it really wouldn't reflect in terms of the design. However, my issue with it, Robert, was that I just felt like they were just doing too much, if that makes sense. Too much, but too little at the same time. For example, I'm looking at the Citadel images, and one thing that they pointed out in the breakdown of it was those protruding elements that were used for reinforcement. And I like details. I like architectural details. I like understanding how things come together. Why are you doing that here if it's made of vibranium? Literally, they could have had a very sleek tower, and then connecting these two things. But why are you doing that? You're doing too much. You're doing too much. Like, I think the effect of it being a bit more of a smoother surface would have done the same thing. I just feel like
Well,
it felt like they were forcing design elements that had use and purpose in terms of the building construction and wanting to implement it here, but it really has no purpose here. It has no use.
it's the same reason why we put brick headers or soldier courses running across the top of a window.
But the,
Traditionally, it's used to support and spread the weight of the load on the top, but we
okay,
don't do that no more because we have lintels that are made of steel. But it's the same reference of a particular style and architectonics that is no longer needed because technology advanced, but it still references a particular cultural aesthetic.
but the thing is, those are still happening in brick construction. This is vibranium. Why?
No,
What do you mean?
no,
In the
because you don't.
masonry and brick construction, they still. I mean,
We don't.
they could still
We don't.
have that.
And it's not when we do it now. It's not actually functioning from the purpose that it was created
But
because we have steel lintels now that are
yeah, but you're
headed.
not going to see brick headers on a steel or on a all glass building, because it's already designed or already structurally. Sorry, I'm getting a little nerdy. I'll bring it back.
You're mixing oil and water.
Well, I don't
You're,
know if
you're,
I am.
it's almost like you're saying you don't appreciate the Sagrada Familia because of all the like
I
decorative pieces
do.
on it. So then
I do.
even if though it's vibranium, they still want to give ode to their history and the decorative pieces of
Oh, fine.
it.
I'm loving that everybody's coming for Perla. Come for Perla. I love it.
No, fine. But okay, fine. Another example, they're using thatch roof on top of like the gold vibranium, and again in my head I'm just like, why? But I digress. I digress.
Maybe it's that one architectural designer who, just wants to do something different.
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing that we do now in our modern way in which we deploy traditional ways of making architecture. Like we put faux beams in all the time. Not that it's structural, but that it gives reference or gives allusion to a particular place and time where those what's now stylistic to us, but it was actually um, the architectonics of the technology from that era.
I fully acknowledge that this is a personal issue. This is a personal problem, but I don't. I think you just need to stay in your lane. Just stay in the lane. That's it. I'm sorry.
Perla just wants the Jetsons. She just wants flying,
Whoa,
floating.
whoa.
No Earth. Why do we need Earth? We have vibranium. Just float.
Jamar, perfect segue. Perfect segue because now like we're going to transition into talking into like Afrofuturism, right? And what's really interesting as I was kind of going headfirst into the idea of Afrofuturism is that obviously Afrofuturism is like cultural aesthetic or a philosophy of science that explores history within the intersection of like the diaspora. But what makes Afrofuturism different is that it is acknowledging of historical context, but when it envisions a future, it also has the opportunity and the freedom to completely disregard historical context. So it in some spaces of Afrofuturism, it's all about envisioning a future of Black people in which the slave trade never happened, in which colonialism never happened. So now we can envision a future of Black culture and Black art and all of this that is completely in some ways ignorant and void of the effects of slave trade and colonialism. And what's interesting when you talk about like the Jetsons, for example, like there was one particular critic that I was listening to or reading about who used the Jetsons as a point of example, right? And the fact that even back then, when the Jetsons was in development and running, at that point in time in history, same as it is now, non-white people make up the majority of the world. So how is it that the Jetsons and the creators of the Jetsons can envision a future in which there's no Black people, no people who is other than the main characters, even the robot servant to the Jetsons family even sounds non-Black. And it's like so in that utopia, what happened to all the Black people? Was there just some apocalypse and like all Black people just disappeared, or did all the Black people just stay at the bottom of the ground and all the white people just went up to the clouds? um but I say all that to say, like, I think if as we think about like architectural styles and what does this Black aesthetic in architecture looks like, what are you all's reaction to actually using the ideas of Afrofuturism as a way to deploy a new way of thinking about like Black architecture, Black urbanism, Black aesthetics in design?
You have a long way of asking questions, so I feel like it takes us
I know.
time.
To be honest, I created that question on the fly. I didn't know.
We
I
know.
didn't know what I was.
Oh, we
I didn't know
know.
what I was going to ask
There
until
was
I
no
started talking.
pontification on that one.
It was
I mean,
like it was
we
like
should have
half
opined on that
thought.
one.
It was half thought, and then also half developing a question and call to action.
All right, so I'm gonna guess I'll start off. This is a little controversial, but I'm like, is that a healthy way of thinking, right? About like this exclusionary way of thinking about like what it would look like to if slavery never happened. Like I know Lupe Fiasco, he had a song back in the day where if roles were reversed, right? You know, like there'd be a white 50 Cent and all that stuff. But I'm like, we can't change that. We can't change back the hands of time. And it's like we have to roll with the punches. We have to, navigate with the hand that we've been dealt. So sometimes I'm just like, is that healthy? You
Mm.
know?
Is but on the contrast to that, is it healthy that we have to always envision and create a future that is fully aware and always processing the trauma that's associated with uh, our history?
I
I feel like that's the
feel,
same question though. That's still under the same kind
yeah.
of premise that Jamar was pointing out though. Like you're using trauma or a world without slavery to create this Afrofuturistic um, town or city. Sorry, Whitney, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I feel like there's a place where you can create Afrofuturism and still have the history. So, like Lovecraft Country, for instance, we're not going to acknowledge the actor who
Hmm.
plays the main character, but we'll acknowledge the rest of the show. It exists in the United States past. So, like, let's say, I think like 1950s or 60s or something. And then they go even further back into history and then move forward. So, I feel like there's a way where you can address Afrofuturism and have that black pride and
Hmm.
confidence in yourself and see a future for yourself and your family, but still acknowledging the past and not changing the past, because they do go back to the Tulsa massacre and they know that we cannot make changes because then it affects everything else in the future if you think of past, present, and future in that sense. Um, but there was one episode in particular that I personally love. I think it's called I Am. And the character is literally transcended into some alien like space that's another world, but she goes to different times in history and she learns who she is and what she calls herself, and that's why it's called I Am, because I am this, I am that. It's beyond just one thing and the one type of identity that was given to her in that time period as a black woman. So for me it would be hard to create an Afrofuturism place without having the past as it is.
But that's also the beauty of Afrofuturism, because you now have the freedom to choose what context is going to inform your new identity or new future of what your particular art form is.
But to me that's writing fantasy or writing sci-fi. Like that's a general thing. It's not just Afrofuturism. It's creating your own world and space. So I think like with what makes Afrofuturism is, to me, the history of the people.
In that same vein, I think that so Afrofuturism as an idea, or this even just sci-fi as a genre that is taking a lot of black cultural references, it's not a new thing, but it's a relatively recent new phenomena in the sense that it's become more mainstream. And traditionally, black people, black artists, black writers, black actors have been excluded from sci-fi fantasy sci-fi fantasy as a genre. And I think that, especially as compared to like hip hop architecture, in the discussion that we had around hip hop architecture, the one the one thing, and we had even said it, the fact that like hip hop architecture in a sense does not exist without really white people, and the effects that slavery and the effects that uh mass displacement and gentrification, all of that stuff is not, without that, hip hop doesn't exist, hip hop architecture doesn't exist. And so now Afrofuturism is this ability to do all of that and exist within its own particular context.
Yeah. My mind is going to other cultures that experienced oppression in some way in the past, but still have an identity. They still have some sort of marker or a style that is specific to them. And so when I think of Afrofuturism, I wonder if we can, I wonder if we can kind of not avoid it, but just create this, for lack of a better term, fantasy area, fantasy location, but still holds true to the identity of Afrofuturistic. Or maybe it's not even going to be called Afrofuturism, but it's really geared specifically for Black people. You know, I don't think. I mean, we have examples of that, in our reality. Unfortunately, it's not in, our Black community, but I just wonder. I'm just posing questions, thinking out loud here, if it is possible.
Yeah, I think there are books, fantasy books, where it's possible. They're their own worlds. The characters are brown and black people. So, like Children, Blood, and Bone, for instance, amazing story. First fantasy story I ever read where the characters are black. Um, and then there are multiple other examples, but like for me, that takes the Afrofuturism out of it because it is made up. It's not
So you don't think
tied to
it could be
anything.
possible if we didn't tie it to the history of Black people, or the history of Black people in America,
Or just
or Black
tying it
people
to the world itself. Like if
to
it's
the world
outside
itself?
of this world, then to like beyond this world, to me, it's not necessarily Afrofuturism. Because every example that I know of Afrofuturism ties it back to the real world in some
Mm,
instance. It's not its own separate
mm,
entity.
no. Mm,
It's unfortunate, but also I don't know. I don't want to say it's unfortunate because I feel like that kind of like goes against who we are today. Like because we like for example, I feel like we like us sitting here now, if Afrofuturism was something like 200 years ago, we would be that vision in some way, shape, or
mm,
form.
mm, mm,
So I don't think it's unfortunate that it's grounded to some degree, but I do wonder like what our vision of Afrofuturism would be from what we know now versus like going into the past and trying to change the past because it's not going to change. What do we want to see in the future in our version of Afrofuturism?
That
mm,
is a very good point because I think in many ways we are the Afrofuture version of our ancestors. Like, just the fact that we're able to, I mean, one, be free, but then even just have these kind of discussions, that's a very good point. And then to your other point, now it's an opportunity for us to create that new version of what the next generation or two generations after us is going to be in terms of like the Afrofuturistic worldview. And I even think to some of the um, like movies and cartoon series that sort of we grew up on, and there's not too many that I can think of in which like our blackness occupied that space that was completely fantasy. And I mean, the closest thing that I personally remember would be like Static Shock, who, I mean,
mm,
I stand 10 toes down. Static Shock is the greatest superhero ever. Um, but like, that was my first time seeing like, a black superhero in this fantasy world. But now, like me and my well, mostly me, but me and my son was watching a Netflix series called My Dad the Bounty Hunter. And I mean, that is a new sort of generational series of just a black family. Mom and dad are superheroes who are bounty hunters who go hunting for aliens. And I mean, I was just completely like drawn in and just sold onto that idea because stuff like that didn't exist when I was little.
mm,
And now my son is able to watch that, and it completely sort of changes his worldview and expands his level of like imagination.
mm.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen Watchmen on HBO with Regina King? Yeah, Regina King.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's also an Afrofuture. Well, I think it would be considered Afrofuturistic, right? Because she's also playing a superhero of some sort. But it's the storyline is the history is based on the civil rights era. Um, so I mean, if you're interested, I'd say watch it. It's really good. It's a good series. Um, and so another superhero.
I honestly think Blade is probably the best black superhero,
Mhm.
but
Oh, I mean,
yeah,
Can
I'm a
someone tell
Wesley
me what
Snipes
Blade is
fan,
about?
but
I'm with you, brother. I haven't seen Blade yet. No kidding.
You haven't seen Blade?
No.
You
come
said
on.
like it's like a cultural phenomenon.
You know what it is? You know what it is, X? Jamar don't like scary movies.
Hey, Get Out was enough for me. Get the keys. Get the keys, Rose. Get the key. Yeah, so yeah, I can't do scary movies. But yeah, like what is Blade?
It's about vampires. He was a half breed vampire, so he could go out in the sun, and also
A
he
black
had
person that
the
can't go in the
strength.
sun?
Huh?
A black person that can't go in the sun?
No, he could go out in the sun.
Okay, of course, makes sense now.
Because he was a half breed.
Yeah. But honestly, I think it goes back to culture again. I think we had in one of our previous discussions about how culture influences Afrofuturism and what parts of our culture we take from. Because, I mean, if maybe Wakanda is the perfect vision of Afrofuturism because we're sort of just creating a world without colonialism and bringing all of those architectural influences from, I mean, different parts of Africa into one place. So maybe it is
Hmm.
the
But I feel like we,
perfect
sorry. I feel
amalgamation.
like
No, go ahead.
I feel like we have to be careful when we say that though, because it's not separate from colonialism. Like colonialism didn't happen in Wakanda, but it happened still to the rest of the world, and they're still aware of the diaspora and the people who are part of that. So it's still not its own separate bubble. Those people just weren't necessarily affected the way the rest of the world was.
Yeah, wasn't that the whole premise of why Killmonger came to Wakanda? Right? Because he was like, you guys are hoarding this, and we're out here struggling in the U.S. or wherever he came from. I believe it's the U.S. And it was like, why aren't you sharing this wealth for everybody? You know, why are you just holding it for your own people?
Which you could argue Killmonger was the best superhero. Just saying. Like they
Wow,
say he's the
superhero.
villain, but
Okay.
like let's be real.
I started the show saying, like he was the best villain, but superhero. All right, okay, we
I
see
mean, he could
where
be
you lie.
considered a hero because he was saying what the people were thinking.
Yeah, I actually didn't even consider him a villain, an antagonist to the story, but I didn't consider
True,
him a
true,
villain.
true.
I mean, he was the Black Panther, so.
Hmm.
But can we really quickly talk about their little fight venue? They have they have vibranium, right? Why are they fighting on waterfalls? Like, why didn't they have some type of coliseum? Like, the Romans had like this coliseum. They had a daggone waterfall with just like special people sitting there. What? Like, what kind of stuff is this?
Goes back to
Well,
the
that's
history,
because
the culture.
Jamar Dumar.
the plant that made you the Black Panther, wasn't it like within that mountain?
But you can still transport the plant. They got vibranium. Take it to the arena. I want to see a show. This is WWE. So clearly, again, there's a class issue because not everybody can see the fight for who's going to be their king. Unless maybe they had like cable TV or something. They might have Netflix. You have to subscribe in, pay a little extra
Come on,
fee,
man.
pay
You
per
know they
view.
at least got BIOS. They don't got no cable TV, no fiber optics, no
I can't.
coax
They got
cable.
satellite TV. What are you talking about?
What? Satellite what? So when it rained, your program is disrupted? Come on, man. They got vibranium.
I give
So
anyone listening to drag Jamar through the dust. Just drag him.
so let me ask you this question, right? Especially in context of our hip hop architecture discussion. As black architects and designer, should we is it a responsibility of ours to really kind of push this idea of Afrofuturism within architecture? Because outside of Wakanda and Black Panther, I don't know if this idea has really been explored as a way to deploy black aesthetics in architecture. In our discipline, I don't think it's really been pushed. The idea has really been pushed a lot, but isn't it a really like revolutionary school of thought though to use Afrofuturism as a way to take ownership of how our culture and how our aesthetics is deployed into the built environment?
I would argue that it already exists. We're just not calling it Afrofuturism.
In what form?
So going back to what Whitney said, that right now we are our our ancestors, or maybe this is what the ancestors imagined Afrofuturism to look like, right? And so I immediately thought about, and I know it sucks that this is the only precedent or the very few precedent that comes to my mind. The African American Museum, the National African American Museum, I think, you know, from the past looking forward, that would be some form of Afrofuturistic architecture in some way. I'm sure you guys can push back on that, but that's where my mind is. We're not calling it Afrofuturistic, but I mean, it's doing what we think it should do, or what it
Mhm.
looks like, or what it can look like.
I think as an exterior element, it is Afrofuturism. But I'm thinking about like Asian architecture and how there are future visions of that. I think there should be no problem with like an Afrofuturistic vision of architecture. So like a pagoda where you have those tiered roofs going up the Asian building. There are futuristic developments of that building style. So I don't see any reason why there shouldn't be futuristic Afro architecture.
Are they calling it Asian futurism, or is it just Asian architecture?
Mm. Mm.
See,
Uh,
that's what I'm trying to say. You know, you
Mm.
smell what I'm cooking?
Perla is on fire, cooking with gasoline right now.
Listen, oh, I, you know what? I'll bring it back. I wouldn't trust myself with
I
gasoline, but
mean,
yes.
could they just be saying it without saying it?
I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Well, I guess they're not saying it because they have no reason to, if that makes sense. Like with our history and our
Mm,
future, we have
mm,
reason to try and claim a space or like
mm,
a state of something. They have no reason to.
You
mm.
know, Perla, you said something that has impacted me significantly, and I'll put a pin in it for a later time. But you all know my feelings towards the African American Museum and how I think it's a very underwhelming design, and a lot of a part of that is because I personally feel that it is completely ignorant in a way of like the African American in the design. Like I think that it doesn't really like take the Black American culture or aesthetics into it at all. It just completely transported to Nigeria. Yeah,
You
that's
know what that?
Nigeria, West African. But to your but what you're basically trying to say, Perla, is that if we consider this an futuristic design, then let's not take the ugly the part of our history which involves human trafficking. Like, let's take it back to the original root and let's acknowledge and reference that. And obviously the transatlantic slave trade is still a part of it, but we're not going to let it be this overwhelming influence that kind of muddies up the original or the origin, the genesis of where our people come from.
So are you now saying you're African American?
I'm just black.
So it ain't touch you that hard. It was a slight touch.
No, don't try to don't listen. I feel great about myself right now. Okay, don't do that.
No, that was a good point. I have to I got to give you kudos
You with me
when
when
you
I'm
do
right.
very profound. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all.
But we're coming close to the end of our time. But just as like a final parting thought, like, are y'all all in on this idea of Afrofuturism? As, particularly in the way of like as a legitimate art form to deploy architecture.
I want to say yes because I feel like it requires imagination and dreaming, and I'm always for that. But I feel like in order for it to be convincing, it would take us, of course, to show the world what that is and show the possibilities of architecture and Afrofuturism and just like in our society as general. Because they, of course, can't see it for themselves. They want to continue to see us as what they think we are.
Yeah, I kind of want to. I'm kind of with Whitney on that. So like, I want to say yes because I'm just drawn to fantasy. I'm drawn to sci-fi. I like out of the box thinking. I got Janelle Monáe built a computer right here. But like, and if it means kind of going on that premise of just using, or I guess being creative and thinking about the what if of our society, then sure, sure. But my hesitation is, how does that look like practically? How does it look like realistically, and how do we get there?
All good answers, and I tend to agree with both of you. And obviously, as somebody who is very visual, that's my question too. Is like, what does it look like? I think it looks like the mothership from Parliament, Funkadelics. I think it looks. I think it looks like. I think it looks like Childish Gambino. I think it looks like Janelle Monáe or Erica Badu.
Andre
Like I think
3000.
like I think it looks like Outcast. You're right. So like there are these things in which this has been deployed, and like I think as us as architects, as Black architects, now it's on us to sort of carry this over into this next medium to further the conversation of what Afrofuturism is, and what it just means for us as Black people.
What if I just want to
So,
design dumb boxes, Rob?
hey,
Speak for yourself.
Jamar, I mean, you've created some very
And that's our
interesting.
show.
So yeah, thank y'all for joining us. This has been another episode of AutoBlack. If you have been with us before and you're back with us again, thank you. And if this is your first time, we appreciate you for taking some time out your day to join us. And feel free to join the conversation. We'd love to hear what you all think on the subject, and we want to be able to engage with you as fellow observers on the stoop. So until next time, we see y'all later.
Hey everybody! Thank you for listening to this episode of AutoBlack. If you have enjoyed the discussion, please hit that subscribe button or follow button, whatever you'd like. AutoBlack is a discussion-based podcast that is unapologetically Black at the intersection of design and culture. We acknowledge that our experiences are just that, our experience, but your voice is worth elevating and your perspective is valid. So please join the conversation and connect with us on Instagram at AutoBlack_podcast, or email us your thoughts, comments, and even future topics you'd like us to discuss on the stoop at AutoBlackPodcast@gmail.com. AutoBlack out. Bye!